Hello, and welcome to another exclusive interview by Recovery Today Magazine at recoverytodaymagazine.com, where first and foremost, we are a magazine of hope. Whether you're considering addiction recovery for yourself or a loved one, or you're actively in recovery a short while or many years, you'll find information on all types of topics to addiction, codependency, recovery, and living a happy, successful, sober life at Recovery Today. My name is Sherry Gaba. I'm the editor of Recovery Today, and I have the distinct pleasure of another great guest today. Her name is Arlina Allen, and she's the host of the ODAAT Chat Podcast and founder of SoberLife School. She is also a writer, a working professional, a wife and mother with over 25 years of continuous recovery from alcoholism and addiction. And she has dedicated her life to helping others discover the solutions to overcoming suffering. I love that, Arlina. And I love that we got to know each other a little bit prior to this interview. So I kind of think I get where your heart is at.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk about recovery. One of my favorite things to talk about.
Right. And, one of the things you said is when you're on purpose, you're aligned to who you are. And so in this moment, I think anybody that's listening, just, get present, get in the moment. Let's hear what Arlina has to say. And I think this is going to be a really purposeful interview. So tell me a little bit about Sober School. And then also tell me if you think, because I know you're really involved in 12-step work, et cetera, do you think that it waters down the 12 steps, or do you think that there's room for all types of paths of recovery?
Yeah, so I'll just start with SoberLife School. It's a online platform where people can sign up to take different kinds of classes, and really these classes are sort of like the best of all the different techniques and workshops and everything that I've learned over the last 25 years. I am a total workshop junkie. So, you know how they tell you to, that when you get sober, you turn your defects into assets. And I had like this need to know things. So once I started discovering some solutions and my life started to change, it became like this, kind of a healthy obsession to find out.
To know what you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. What's interesting is that when I showed up to recovery, I was completely self-centered, but incapable of self-examination. Right. And I started asking questions, and one question led to another. And that kind of set me on the path to recovery. And so that's what SoberLife School is I've tried to put into small bite-sized courses, things that focus on like repairing relationships, which is really about a method of resolving resentment so that we can feel closer again. Also, the Connection Cure is my signature course. And that really is, the antidote to, even in like 12-step literature, they talk about alcoholism as a disease of isolation. And so connection is the cure, right? So it's about building self-esteem, which I really am obsessed with lately because I feel like we attract what we feel we deserve, right? And so many of us are trying to level up, right? So where are the blocks to manifesting what we really want? It's, I feel like the key to a lot of that is self-esteem. Like we have to get into our beliefs and, reframe them and maybe sort of reprogram our minds a little bit so that we can attract better things in our lives and kind of level up.
Yeah, you're definitely hitting my hot buttons and some of my questions. I had a question about isolation and connection, and maybe I'll read the question so that we can go a little deeper. But, you're also talking about the law of attraction. I wrote the book, The Law of Sobriety, and I rephrased it, or what am I trying to say? Repurposed it and I have a different title now called Infinite Recovery. So if you go to Amazon, you can see Law of Sobriety, or you can see Infinite Recovery, which is the ebook version. And then I added a chapter about abundance. But that was my hope, is that to really bring law of attraction to people in recovery, because when I've worked with them and you talk about infinite intelligence, or you talk about source or pure consciousness, there seems to be this passion for those ideas rather than just always talking about, quote, a God, which I guess brings me to the second half of my question to you, which was, do you believe that the 12 steps gets watered down with all these other courses? I don't personally. I think that the more we know, the more we know. I do think we have to be aware of spiritual bypasses where we.
Oh, yes. Oh my God. Spiritual bypassing was a term that came to me recently. And I'll just digress for 1 second with the spiritual bypassing, because was so profound for me. My son broke his back at the beginning of the summer. He did not have a spinal cord injury. He was so lucky.
Thank God.
Yeah, but he was in an ATV accident. He's 15 and poor kid. He'll be fine and he'll make a full recovery. But this is where spiritual bypassing came to me, because I did not want to feel the sort of post PTSD of what could have happened. I did the spiritual bypassing. I was like, thank God he's going to be okay. He's going to make a full recovery. I did all that, but I had like this horrible feeling for a couple weeks after. And I realized that even today, with 25 years of recovery, I don't want to feel my feelings, especially the negative ones, right? I wanted to just do the spiritual bypassing. So that's my hot button recently.
It's sort of like we can have both, right? I teach people like you can have the awareness of the feeling, and you can have the hope and the spiritual, belief and the inspiration. But you can do both. It's not like one or the other. And I think addicts and alcoholics tend to be very black or white.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So
it's like, okay, I'm really feeling sad. He had this accident, and okay, I thank you, God, the gratitude, and thank you that he's okay. And thank you for having a great hospital for him, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to have a phone ringing in the background, but this is just
okay.
It's all messy, and it just is going to be what it's going to be, because I'm doing it from my beautiful home, which is what I love doing. So there you have it. Phones and dogs. So getting back to watering things down. I think that people are just so confused. I mean, I look at Instagram and there's just so much out there in
so much
recovery. I have a membership site. You have your sober school. I mean, we all are doing so many great things, although mine is more geared really at this point towards codependency, but
they're so important. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're doing that. There's such a need for, I can think of 10 people right off the top of my head that I have to send your way.
Well, the thing is, I think what's been my challenge is, sure, I reach a lot of families, and I was the wife of an alcoholic, and I am a codependent and a love addict in recovery. But a lot of addicts have codependency. When I share the story of my ex's relapse, it was all based on codependency. And, I don't think a lot of addicts realize that. They're just really focused on getting sober, but sometimes they forget about what's underneath that need to escape, because codependency is just another escape.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. But to go back to your question about, things being watered down, even I'm doing something called the Big Book Awakening, which is sort of a process of, I'm on step 1, and it's a process of reframing some of the questions reframing statements into questions. And it's been a really interesting process. But even in the Big Book, it talks about, it says we only know but a little. Right? So it's a great foundation. And I think it's important that in the beginning that you focus on one thing, focus on one process to completion. I mean, I think as addicts and alcoholics or whatever, we do tend to bounce around a little bit. We have short attention spans.
Yes.
So my encouragement would be to finish, do the 12 steps, finish, and incorporate other things. I'm
totally with you.
Yeah.
It's the foundation.
It's a foundation, right? It was never meant to be exclusive. People have a tendency to turn things into religions, right? Like 12 steps is not a religion. It's not exclusive. It's evolving, and there are no rules per se. We have steps and traditions, but they're not laws. I mean, people get, for me, especially, it's like somebody that has a podcast, I'm breaking tradition 11, and I do so consciously, and some people are really mad about it. But, I do see that there are some issues with the 12-step community in general. While I see a need for, the keeping secrets and having a safe place, I can see it also engenders shame a little bit. It fosters a little bit of shame. So, I mean, there's a time and a place, right? But I think the 12 steps are magical. Every time I go through them, I evolve a little bit. Every time I address the steps, I'm different because of the steps, right? So every time I go through it, I change and I get something different out of it because I'm different every time I address them. So
I love that. I mean, you're probably one of the first people I've interviewed that have these other alternative paths that, not even alternatives, like additional paths that really is, talking more positively about the 12 steps. I hear a lot of negativity about the 12 steps. And I too,
I don't get that.
If you decide ever to become a therapist, one of the things we learn is start where your client is. So often, like when my clients come in and if they're just not ready to go to a 12-step meeting, then where are you ready to start? So maybe you're ready to start and take one of Arlina's classes or, someone else's yoga and recovery class or whatever. And then, maybe that will eventually lead you to the 12 steps.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was one of the things I loved about Annie Grace is she's meeting people where they are and she's addressing people who are just starting to question their drinking. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant that she's, and she took like emotion out of it. She's all scientific about it. I love it. I love it all. I love it all because everybody's in a different spot.
The whole sober curious movement.
Yeah.
Just be curious. Like what, maybe like, listen, I've abused alcohol in my life. I don't identify as an alcoholic, but there were times in my life like college or when my dad died where I probably was drinking more than I should. But then I stopped and then it just wasn't an issue. Does that mean I'm an alcoholic? For me, I'm not, but if you go to a 12-step meeting and you tell that story, they will say that you're an alcoholic.
Some people will, yeah, because that was the barrier. That was the barrier to entry for AA is that you had to admit you're an alcoholic. That's a really big hurdle to overcome.
It is if you believe in your heart that, if you look at the DSM, which is our psychological manual, there is a difference between substance abuse and alcoholism and dependence. There's just.
Did they call it alcohol use disorder? Isn't alcoholism kind of an outdated term now?
I have a biller that does my billing, so I'm embarrassed to tell you I don't even know. I just, I'll tell her substance abuse, moderate or whatever, and she kind of knows how to plug it all in. Sorry. Okay. But I guess what I'm saying is there is, a difference. There is a difference that there are sometimes in our lives where we abuse. Now, love addiction or codependency for me, that's like a full-blown disease. If I'm not, in that recovery process, I will just go back into another unhealthy situation. So I know that that's my disease. So, but that's my experience. Let everybody just have their own experience and be curious.
Yeah. I think there's too much prescribing advice, to be honest. I feel like the longer I'm sober, the less I really know what's good for someone else. I honestly don't. I really have gotten to that place. Like, I don't know what's right for you. Yeah. That's up to you. I can share my experience. And if you identify, if we have that heart connection and you're like, yeah, me too, then we can do some work. But, yeah, I feel I really, and I think that's why so many people kind of rail against AA because there's so much, advice and
advice by people that are not trained professionals.
I know. Right. And listen, we're sick people. It's not the hotbed of mental health, right? You have sick people trying to help other people.
Yes, I would believe. And the same with codependency programs like Al-Anon or Coda, because these are people that want to control. So, for instance, when I got back with my ex, which of course we subsequently ended up breaking up for good and it was the right thing, but I had to go back and find that out. But boy, I got a lot of judgment, which only just made me feel more shameful.
Exactly.
Forget my grand sponsor said to me, there's no shame in loving an alcoholic. And when she said that, it was like, I'm not a bad person.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was just having this discussion with the host of the Way Out podcast, these two guys, Charlie and Jason, amazing people, where we had this discussion around judgment versus like honest feedback, where is the line? Because on these recovery communities, people will share something outrageous. It's like if you are participating in an abstinence program and you are taking something like Suboxone or smoking weed, you're not abstinent. It's pretty clear. And so it's important to be like, well, you're not abstinent. I'm not judging you or shaming you, but that's not what this is. And there's harm reduction is also very important, but it's so funny to watch the fights online. People are like, oh, that, by the way, that's not abstinent. And then people get so mad and like, oh, you people are so judgmental. And it's like, well, what?
A lot of that.
Yeah, people just get really upset. And
when I did Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew, which was,
that's amazing, by the way. Congratulations.
It was a long time ago, but it was a rehab show. And it was like, talk about me getting a lot of naysayers. Oh my God. And then of course, probably 5 of the cast members have died since. Of course, everyone blamed it on Celebrity Rehab. Well, it had nothing to do with Celebrity Rehab. The percentage of people that died from this disease are the percentage that died from the show. Right. I mean, it's not because Celebrity Rehab didn't work for them. It was just, that percentage.
It's the nature of the disease. Yeah, it's deadly, which is why I think that's why people get so emotional about it. Because listen, over 25 years of recovery, I've been to a lot of funerals around people who die from their addiction. This is serious. And you see deaths. And so I understand that people are very, at the heart of it, we love each other.
Yeah. The intentions are good. Sometimes it's the presentation.
Yeah.
So, what does ODAAT stand for? I probably should know that already, but
well, ODAAT stands for one day at a time.
Oh gosh. Okay. I knew that, but forgot it.
Well, it's so funny because I didn't really think it through when I named the podcast. I named it after my favorite 12-step meeting. It met every day at 6 a.m. And these are people who I think there's something about that early morning hour that it just attracts a certain kind of person who's willing to go to any length. And it's a daily meeting and there's like 100 people every morning.
Yeah.
And it was it's still going on. I moved, but such a loving, special group. And I wanted to carry that message to the podcast. And I started it because one of my girlfriends was there at the 6 a.m. meeting and she died 3 hours later in a single car accident. And the idea it was just tragic. I mean, we had a huge service for her, but and she was just a few months older than me. And I had been wanting to do the recovery podcast, but because of their traditions, I was very reluctant because I wanted to honor them. But when she died, I was like, you know what? I want other people to experience the love that we had felt. And, people might say, oh, if it was such a great meeting, why did she die? Well, she had other issues, and she had been suffering from insomnia. And when you're suffering from insomnia for an extremely long period of time, your judgment becomes just as impaired as if you were drinking maybe. Anyway, she was in an accident. She passed away. And I was like, you know what? Life is too short. If this desire is on my heart to share this loving message from this ODAAT meeting, then I just felt like I was like, whose approval am I waiting for? So that was kind of where the name of the podcast came from and how it started. And it's been a couple of years and there's been some amazing experiences that have come from it.
Are the two things that you do see underneath addiction? I often say it's codependency and fear, but do you think it's a lack of connection and isolation?
Absolutely. I mean, so addiction, in my mind, as I understand it, I'm not a trained professional, but it seems to be a form of distraction. And I don't care if you're using drugs, alcohol, people, shopping, sex, food, whatever it is, we all need to distract from the uncomfortable feelings that we have. And I feel like from what I've read over the years, I'm obsessed with neuroscience and all this other stuff and quantum physics, our brains are designed to help us survive, right? And some of us are very sensitive creatures, right? And we need to be able to cope and survive in this world. And so we form these distractions and we distract from all the uncomfortable feelings. And so rather than focusing on the problem, I like to focus on the solution. It's like, well, how can we manage our feelings? What are the self-care practices that we can develop so that we develop, instead of distracting, we can handle the feelings that come up. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's reasons that we distracted. I'm sure you've heard this before, sometimes the alcohol had worked. You needed it.
Oh, yeah.
There was just so much chaos and trauma in your life, and it worked until, of course, it stopped working. And so distraction is just a defense mechanism, and then it just stops working, usually.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not to be overly dramatic, but I mean, I was self-medicating for a lot of years. And, when I was younger, I was, I had, they didn't really talk, I'm 50, so back, when I was a teenager, they didn't talk about like suicidal ideation. There wasn't a lot of awareness about mental health. And I turned to drugs and alcohol, and I was self-medicating. Right. And sometimes I think if I had to feel all the pain that I was going through, I don't know if I could have survived.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no shame. That's just what you use to, disassociate. And then you found a way to self-awareness. And, what's great about what you're sharing is sometimes self-awareness is painful.
It is. And I like to think of it now as growing pains. Right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's either suffer the pains of growing or suffer the pains of where you are. We do have a choice, and it's, we stand at the crossroads and we have to make that decision at some point. It's like, it's painful either way, but I would rather have, a reward at the end. Everything has a price tag. So for me, it's about paying the price up front rather than paying the price in the end. I would rather do the emotional self-examination so that I can be free later, rather than distracting with food, or like today, it's more like food or TV or something. You know what I mean?
Right. And then the truth is, like you said, growing pains, and some people maybe shudder and like, oh, growing pains. But you know what? Whoever said growing pains are a bad thing? We grow the minute we're born. So growing is a very natural thing. And so a growing pain is just natural.
Yeah, it's natural and it's unavoidable. Like the pain is unavoidable.
Right, exactly.
So might as well deal with it head on.
As they say, suffering is optional. It's what we attach to it, right? So
that's brilliant. Yes.
Throw that in. So do you think that women are struggling more with alcoholism today? I mean, I know that my daughter, she had gone to this, it was like sort of an open house for my granddaughter's new school last year. And it was like at 11 o'clock. And then she told me like people were drinking at 11 o'clock, and you like brought your kid. And I'm like, that's really weird. And
school.
Right. And then I had another client. Well, I've heard a lot about these painting parties and drinking and
Drunko, meaning like bunko, but they call it drunko.
I mean, I've heard of the bunko, but that's funny. Okay. So that's another one. And I've heard I had a client that, she was going through this awful divorce, and her husband was following her, and she was, out with the women, and it was sort of like a school function sort of thing. And she, ended up, having her kids taken away because she was driving and drinking. And, so there's some kind of like glamorization, I think, for mommies. And it wasn't like that. My daughter's 35. There wasn't that, we just didn't have that. So do you think there's more of it today?
I think so. I mean, there's we live in a drinking culture, right? Like where drinking is acceptable. It's like, God forbid, people smoke weed, and I see it a lot in, I'm from Silicon Valley in high tech sales, and where it's like, you're supposed to drink with your customers and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. A lot of industries are like that.
Yeah, honestly, the more I talk to people, they're like, oh, my industry is like that too.
Especially at conventions or conferences.
Yeah. We're just saturated with alcohol everywhere, and it is affecting women more and more. And I see that in the women that are newly sober coming to meetings or in online groups. And there's so many online support groups focused on women. It does seem, but while there does seem to be like a lot of women, openly suffering with the alcoholism, I feel like there's a lot of online support too.
Yeah. Well, I think it just goes back to things they really haven't changed. The work-life balance always seems to be with the woman. I mean, I wish I could say that it's changed. And I think my daughter's boyfriend, the
Agreed.
father of my granddaughter, is fantastic. So I will not put him in this category, but I still think that it's all put sometimes on the woman. And then the only way to release and get relief and a reprieve is that drink, they think.
Do you feel like it's put on the women, or do you think women just naturally are like, I feel like we're just hardwired to respond to our children. Like we're the nurturers, right? It's like
That's
our
a
biology.
really great question. Oh my God, that's so great because, here I am, I talk a lot about codependency. I think you're right. I think that we tend to have more of the codependency traits, although plenty of men have codependency traits. They rescue, God, So what I was saying is I think that because, I work so much in codependency, I do think a lot of women struggle with codependency.
Right.
Men do too, but I think you're right. We are sort of trained to be the caretakers. And I think we also have a lot of denial in our system. We kind of grow up trying to make things work, try to fit a square peg into a round hole. I think we tend to I think more women will accept unacceptable behavior. Again, men do too. Don't get me. I mean, I have a whole Facebook codependency group and my Wake Up Recovery group, and I have plenty of men, but mostly it's women. And you're absolutely right. That's a really good point. Women are kind of like socialized.
We are. And you mentioned denial. And I thought that was really interesting because we are trained from day one to deny our feelings and to deny our needs and to put other people first. I mean, it's everywhere. It's like when I first got sober, I had this awakening period where I was like, oh, well, no wonder my self-esteem is in the toilet. I've been taught my whole life that I'm not good enough the way I am, right? Like even standing at the supermarket line, you are like inundated with these magazines with these beautiful women, and all the like little subject lines from the articles are like, how to be a better lover, 10 ways to make your thighs thinner, how to make, all these messages that I'm not okay the way I am, right?
Not to mention social media. You can't, you don't fit in, or someone's more popular, someone gets more likes, or someone, God forbid, if you're young, being bullied. You're right. It's huge. And you're right.
Huge.
And it's all this. What I hear over and over again is the women always go, why do I always think it's my fault? It's always my fault. Like it's fascinating. So yes, I'm going to say that may be a lot of why women are so stressed out, because they don't have the best boundaries sometimes, and they don't say no enough, and it leads to chronic toxic stress.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're taught that our feelings are not that important, and that all our validation comes from the way we look, and as we get.
And then also, for me, it was, if I have you, then I'm something. If you are in my life and I have an object or a partner, really an object sometimes, but a partner, then I'm whole, and then I belong, and I will deny if you're, have all these qualities that are not good for me. And I think that's common.
Yeah, I think, and we're desperate to find significance and validation, right? And we tend to find significance and validation through, like you were saying, people and objects, the whole, designer handbags and cars, and the successful man, behind every successful man as a woman driving him. It's like we can't claim the power for ourselves. We have to do it through people and objects, because we're all playing small because we're not allowed to play big like the boys do. Yeah, it's just a gender thing. There are differences in the genders.
See that in your field of technology, which really just brings us full circle as we close this interview, is back to connection, because I think all of these outside things, including alcohol, objects, and relationships, and people, places, and things, as we say, are again that needing for connection, and it's a false connection.
It is, and I'm so glad that we're wrapping up on solution, which is about self-care. It's about tuning in and finding out. Sometimes we don't even know what it is that we need because we're so disconnected from ourselves. We spend our whole lives disconnecting right? That it's no wonder we don't know what we feel or what we want. It's like, have you ever seen those old school telephone operators? It's a lady sitting at a desk and it has like a wall of plugs and she's got all these, it's like, those are our feelings. And we're trying to figure out where the plugs go. It's like, what are my feelings? So it's about building self-esteem, self-care, and those are the solutions. And it's so funny. Nobody wants those things to be the solutions. They're simple, they're spiritual, and they have nothing to do with the problem. We obsess about the problem. It has nothing. You don't find the light by further investigation of the darkness.
Maybe you should call your school the Sober Solution School.
Oh, I like that.
You know what? I think, well, first of all, I want to say, Arlina, as I do a lot of interviews, been doing this for a long time, and you have such great presence. You really are in the moment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, especially coming from you, somebody who has been so involved in the community for so long. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I love this. And I want to make sure people can find you. They can take your courses. They can listen to your podcast. So maybe we can just close with how we can find you.
So you can find me at SoberLifeSchool.com, and the podcast is on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, all that stuff. And it's ODAATChat.com is the website, and ODAAT is spelled ODAAT. I didn't think that through when I named it.
Well, there's always rebranding, but right. Once you know what it is, and I think people who are in that community probably know what it is. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
You're so welcome.